In this tutorial, we're going to trace an image and use lines to be able to create a logo that will look something like this at the end. So to go ahead and start, we're going to go to File, New, and go ahead and just choose the letter size and say OK. With your blank document, make sure you save it into your tutorials folder so that you have it saved before we get started. To begin with, you're going to need to download the image called Martin Stadium Cougar Statue.jpg, which you can find from the tutorial assignment page. And I've already downloaded that, so as soon as you have it saved on your computer, you can go to File and Place, and go ahead and find that image, click Place, and then you'll click anywhere on your artboard here to put that image on your artboard. We're going to go ahead and enlarge this a little bit. If you hold down Shift, you can drag one of the corners and it will change proportionally. If you don't hold down Shift, it will stretch in every direction, which is not what you want. So make sure you hold down Shift and make the image so it fills, a good portion of your artboard, but not necessarily the whole thing. Next, we're going to go to our Layers panel, which is over here in our right-hand sidebar, and we can see that that image is showing up automatically in Layers 1. We don't want to be able to move this image, we're going to trace it, so we're going to click this little box to toggle the lock, and when the lock appears we can no longer move that image. We're going to create a layer on top, which we'll use for our tracing, so click the Create New Layer icon down here, or you can do that from the top menu as well. And it might be a good idea to name your layers so that you can find them more easily later on. So we're using a photo here, and photos are not really used in vector graphics. They can't be. They're not scalable. They're made out of pixels. And in fact, when we zoom in, we're going to see that this image already is starting to look pixelated, even at the size that we're using it at. This is the problem with raster or bitmap graphics and why you can't use them in logos. However, we can use photos as a reference to create vector graphic shapes. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to use the pen tool to trace this cougar. We're only going to trace the front half of it. So using your pen tool, come up here. The pen tool is a family of tools. You can make sure you're on the pen tool that doesn't have a plus or minus, although the plus pen tool would also work fine for this portion. And we're going to start right here where the cougar's belly kind of meets the back leg. And I'd recommend zooming in pretty far for this step and then navigating. Oops, looks like I'm already creating a shape. If you do that, just go ahead and delete it. Instead, we want our first point to be right underneath the belly of the cougar. And now what I'm doing, I'm not holding and dragging, I'm just clicking with the pen tool to trace around this cougar and coming down the leg. I can adjust my view. When we get down to the rock, follow the rock back until it's about even with that first point that you drew, right about here. We'll be cutting that off later, but we want it to be about even so we have enough space. At some point, it's going to become difficult to create your trace line if it still has this fill color. So we're going to go ahead and adjust the colors. You can do this without lifting, without ending your pen tool. You can just go over to your swatches panel and click the little double arrow to swap them. That's if you have the default of black and white. And then we can remove that black fill by clicking the transparent swatch there. And now we have a nice white line that we can use for tracing the rest of our shape. You can hold down Shift to draw a perfectly straight line, which I'm going to do here to get all the way down to the bottom of this image. And then I'm going to go around to this rock. With the pen tool, if you click and then hold, you create these little anchor points and it will make a curve rather than making straight points. This is a really valuable thing to learn how to do in Illustrator, but it's also kind of tricky. So if you're just making straight points, you can also do that and adjust them to be curves later on. Coming up around here, At any point, if your points are not exactly where you want them, that's okay. We'll be able to adjust them once we've created the full outline. Here's a tricky little curved spot right around the face of the cougar. Tracing can be a pretty time-consuming part of Illustrator. There are also some techniques built in that will do some auto-tracing for you, but in my experience it's not necessarily that great unless you have an image that has really high contrast, like something that's in black and white. And in most other cases you might get an outline, but then you'll spend so much time cleaning it up that it doesn't really save you that much time anyway. We're almost around here to the back of the cougar. This is a statue outside Martin Stadium, and what we're going to do is use it as a silhouette in our project. So when you get to the very top of the cougar's back, the highest point, go ahead and click all the way back down to where we started, our very first anchor point, and that will complete the shape. We can zoom out just to see how that looks. And that includes some of that rock in the front half of the cougar. Now we're going to draw another shape with the pen tool to outline the space in between the cougar's legs. We need to do this so that we can make it a cutout later on so that we don't include that part in our shape. Once that's complete, you'll close it back up with the same anchor point that you started from again. Now if you need to adjust anything, you can use the white arrow to do that. The white arrow will select individual points. That allows you to move them if they were in the wrong place. You can also adjust them up or down. And you can also adjust these anchors if you have a curve to make something curved more or less. You know, you can really mess it up too by accident, but that's a nice way to help sort of make your tracing outline as accurate as possible and also as smooth. If you have a point that you didn't draw as a curve and you want to convert it to a curve, you can use this convert button up here in the top left, and that will convert it to smooth, which gives you those little anchor points for the curve. Once we have both shapes outlined, we're going to select them both the inside shape and the outside shape, and we're going to change them from outlines to having a solid color. So I'm going to take off the stroke up here in the top left, and I'm going to give them a fill color. It's not really very important at this point what fill color you choose. You can just pick anything that appeals to you. Now we're going to go ahead and hide that photo layer within our layers panel so that we no longer see it. At this point we've traced it, we no longer need it, and in fact you could delete it, although I don't recommend doing that until the end in case you have to go back to this step for any reason. When you hide it, you can start seeing our shape taking place. With both these shapes selected, both the cougar outline and the space between its front legs, we're going to go and use the Shape Builder tool, which looks like this over in our toolbar. So with both of these highlighted, when you hover, it gives you the option to add, or if you hold down either Alt or on a PC or Option on a Mac, it gives you the option to delete it. So while holding down Alt or Option, click that space in the middle, and it will now disappear so that we have that space showing, and we have our silhouette complete. Now we're going to draw an ellipse, a circle essentially, to encompass the entire cougar, at least the front of it. So hold down Shift while using the ellipse tool to make a perfect circle. And we can adjust this a little bit, but make sure it includes the front of the cougar and a little bit of the rock, but not too much extra space. At this point, obviously, you can't really see where that outline is very easily. It's a good idea to change the color of that circle and also go to Object, Arrange, Send to Back. You can also adjust that within your Layers panel as well so that that circle goes behind and you can see how it's placed with the cougar image. I'm just going to tighten that up just a little bit more, and now we can see how those shapes are going to intersect. We're again going to use the Shape Builder tool to create some negative space with this shape. So we're going to go back to that tool, and again, holding, oh, we have to have both shapes selected. That's a good mistake to make because it's a common one. So make sure you have both shapes selected, then go to the Shape Builder tool, and we're going to again hold down Alt or Option depending on what operating system you have, and delete those extra spaces around the circle. And then in this case, we're also going to delete the cougar outline that we just created, so that instead of having the outline, we now have negative space showing the silhouette within our circle. The Shape Builder tool is really powerful. This is just a very small taste of what it can do, but that's a good tool to explore if you're looking for some powerful ways to create different shapes and graphics. Now we're going to select all three of these remaining pieces and unite them by going to Window and Pathfinder if it's not already available. This is something that you can dock in your sidebar if you wanted to later on. And we're going to click the Unite button to make this now act as one shape. Now we're going to draw a circle that matches up perfectly with our circle here. There are multiple ways to do this, but this is one way that kind of gives you some tools for aligning different items and resizing them. So go ahead and just draw any circle that's about the right size to begin with, and make it so it has a stroke rather than a fill. And now we're going to go ahead and align it using, if you select both shapes at the same time, you can use these align tools. We're going to go ahead and use the centering one, so it's centered. And then now, if you hold down Shift and either Option or Alt, you can make images for just the outline circle. Then you can adjust it in size all the way around. To get it to fit exactly, don't hold down Option or Alt. Just make it a little bit smaller so that it's about the same size as that circle and centered in the same way. Once you know that it's the same size and in the same location, go ahead and hold down Shift and Alt or Option, and we're going to go ahead and make it a little bit bigger than our existing circle. So again, those steps, we created a circle, we aligned it using the align tools, then we made it to make sure it fit, and then we made it a little bit bigger by holding down Shift and either Alt or Option. Now we're going to make two more copies of this circle. We can make a copy by going to Edit, Copy. You can also use keyboard shortcuts, and then go to Edit, Paste in Place to make an exact copy in the same location. You can see that in your Layers panel too if you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And now hold down again Shift and either Alt or Option to make a slightly bigger circle around that one. And we're going to do that one more time. So Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste in Place. Then we'll hold down Shift and either Alt or Option and make one more circle expanded out around our shape. Now that we have all three circles in place, we're going to move on to the next step of adding text. So we're going to go ahead and go to the Type tool, and if you hold down the Type tool, it's a whole family of tools, including this Type on a Path tool, which is the one we're going to use. So click anywhere on the circle, the one that you just drew, but the smallest one of those three. And at this point, type your first name and last name. In this tutorial, I am typing actually first name, last name, but please note that if you do this for your own tutorial, you're not going to get credit. You need to use your actual name. So, do not actually type this. Has everyone seen that? Thank you. So, your first name and last name. And at this point you can go ahead and sort of adjust the size a little bit to make it bigger. You want to make it so that your text fits about halfway around the circle. And you also might want to change the font or the thickness. You can pick something that you like, that you think represents you well, or just something that is appealing to you. I'm going to go ahead and pick a fairly simple font, but you can pick whatever you like. Once you have a font that you like, then also go to this the word character. If you click on that, it opens up the character options panel. And click on this little symbol for all caps, which is in the bottom left, and that will turn your text into all caps. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger to try to get all the way around the circle. I'm also going to separate the letters a little bit. If you want to do that, it's by holding down either Alt or Option and then using your arrow keys. You can kern the text a little bit. Right now this is now starting at the top and going all the way around. To be able to adjust where the text begins and ends, there are these little anchor points at the top. So if you switch to your black arrow tool, you can adjust the way that they are. So first I'm going to move this one over, and this is the one that has that tiny little arrow there that controls where your text begins. So if I drag that around about halfway, that will now adjust how my text is. If that method doesn't work for you, an alternate version, you can use the rotate by going to Object, Transform, and Rotate. Next, we're going to stylize one of our other lines so it becomes more of a graphic element to go with our logo. So now we're going to take the next biggest line, and I'm going to resize it, again by holding down both Shift and Alt or Option so that it resizes evenly. And I want it so it kind of cuts right through my text. So depending on what font you used and what size that is, you may need to resize your circle. You want it to cut right through the middle, and now we're going to increase the stroke. So there are a couple places to do that. You can do that at the top. We're going to go ahead and use the stroke panel that's over in our sidebar, and you can increase the weight there until it's about the same width as your text. Generally something between like 15 to 30 points should be about right, depending on the size of your graphics, so you'll just have to play around with it a little bit. At this point, if all you see in this stroke panel is weight, you need to click on this little menu in the top right and click Show Options so that we see additional options here. We're going to go ahead and click the dashed line checkbox, and this automatically puts in the dashed line that I used earlier. You will probably get a different default, and so you'll need to figure out about what size works well for you. The dashed line, the first dash is how thick your different rays are, and you want the gap to be a smaller number, usually something sort of in between that size. You can also do points if you want, 3.5. And what we're looking for is creating sort of a rays effect, so it looks more like sun rays than a line. Now we have this circle, but we don't want it to be covering up our text, so we're going to use the scissors tool to turn it from a circle into a semicircle. The scissors tool is part of the eraser family of tools, and the eraser does not work well in Illustrator. I would strongly urge you to stay away from that, because it doesn't work the way we think it will with pixels, because these are all made out of shapes. However, the scissors tool is very handy. What we do with the scissors tool, once we've selected it, is click on the anchor points where we want to cut shapes. So I'm going to click on the anchor point both on the left and on the right. And now I have two semicircles that are not connected. So if I go back to the black arrow tool, I can click on the top half of the circle and delete it, and you can see that now I have enough, only the bottom is showing, and I have enough space to show my text above. If your text no longer looks centered, this is where you might want to adjust it a little bit so that it evens up with your new line. Now we're going to move on to selecting the largest circle on the artboard, and we're going to give this a stroke as well. We're just going to make it a little bit thicker. Something like 4 to 8 points usually works pretty well depending on the scale of the rest of your project. And we're going to adjust the size again by holding down Shift and either Alt or Option, because we want it to be a little bit closer to our graphic so that the spacing is about even between our inside circle, our line graphic, and then our outside line. So now we have our graphic pretty close to being done, but although the lines look right, they are not scalable. This is something where if we selected this entire graphic and shrunk it down, even by holding Shift, those lines stay exactly at the same size. They don't shrink in the same proportion, and so it completely ruins the way that that graphic would look. Likewise, if we made it bigger, they would stay the same size and would look very thin if we were putting this logo on, say, a billboard or a t-shirt. So we need to be able to make those lines fully scalable before this is going to be a useful logo. First of all, we're going to select the dashed semicircle, and we're going to go to Object and Expand. Sometimes you will get instead an Expand Appearance option, and you'll need to do that as well. Object, Expand Appearance. Now we're going to select the text in the outer circle and the dashed line if it hasn't already been expanded, and go to Object and Expand. Make sure that all three of these things are checked. The top, Object, Fill, and Stroke, say OK, and now you can tell that those lines that are showing up around our shapes are going all the way around them rather than just showing up where the baseline for the text is and where those lines are. This is really important, but it's also kind of a scary step because at this point you can no longer edit that text the way you would normally do. You can no longer adjust the thicknesses of those lines the way you adjust the stroke of the lines before. So once you're at this point, there's kind of no going back. However, everything is now fully scalable. If we made this really small, oops, it's going to look exactly the same. Up until this point, the colors of our logo were unimportant, but now we're going to focus on the color and add a subtle gradient to make it look more polished. So if you don't still have your Pathfinder tools open, go ahead and go to Window and Pathfinder to make sure that those are still available. And with all the elements of your artboard selected, go ahead and click the Unite button to make them all act as one shape. Then in the right side toolbar, we're going to click on the Gradient panel and go ahead and click on the swatch on the top. You can also click on the symbol there, and that will apply usually a black and white gradient. If that's not what's applying, you can click on this little arrow to get the full menu and click the black and white one. Below this there are these gradient sliders, and this adjusts the way that your gradient would appear. You can also use this to change the colors. So if you double click on one of these little swatch arrows, you can pick a different color. You can either do it using the color palette or the eyedropper here, or you can use the swatches that appear with the little grid. And for this you should choose either two colors that are similar, different shades of the same hue, or that are analogous colors that are fairly similar together. I'm going to go ahead and pick some warm colors for this version of it. I'm going to pick sort of an orange for this one, and then I'm going to double click on the black one and pick sort of a yellowy orange. So the two similar colors, but we do see a shift between them. Now we're going to go over to the gradient tool on our left side toolbar. It has exactly the same symbol, but this one's a tool compared to the one that represents a panel on the right side. And when we click that, you can start at the very bottom of your graphic, hold down Shift and drag up, and that will now apply the gradient to the whole shape evenly rather than applying it to each individual shape. So now you start with your bottom color down here, and it ends with your top color up there. If you decided you didn't like your colors, you could go and adjust them in your gradient panel at this point. Now there's only one more step. If we zoom out, we can see that this logo does not really fill the vast majority of our artboard. We can change that really quickly by highlighting our logo and going to Object, Artboards down at the very bottom, and Fit to Selected Art. And now our artboard will jump right in and only represent the image in our logo. Make sure you save this completed file so that you can export it as a web version later in this assignment.